So, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to this first meeting of Council for 2026. Happy New Year to you all. We have no apologies today, so we have every councillor in the room. I do want to start today, as everyone knows, Sir Tim Shadbolt passed away on the 8th of January, and there was a wonderful send-off at his funeral at the Civic Theatre on the 16th of January. I think it's appropriate for Council to formally send condolences to his family from this meeting today. Also, to further mark his extraordinary contribution to Council and to Invercargill over nearly 30 years, we will hold 1 minute silence, starting from now. Rest in peace, Sir Tim. Does anyone have a declaration of interest to make? So with that, we always start these meetings with a statement of reflection, and Ria Bond has volunteered to do it today. So Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Mick Campbell. Before I begin, I want to speak directly to those for whom recent tragic events weigh heavily upon them. To the families and whānau across Aotearoa, New Zealand, who are grieving right now from tragedies of present and past, we know your hearts are weeping, we feel it too. For many of you, these moments will reopen wounds that never truly closed. Please know that here in Southland, you are not alone. We send our strength, our araha and our support to you. We also hold in our thoughts the families who are still waiting for their loved ones to be returned. Your waiting is heavy and your strength is seen. We hold you in our thoughts today. As we begin this first council meeting of 2026, I reflect quietly on the responsibilities we carry forward together. Today marks 42 years since the Southland floods, the 27th of January 1984, a benchmark of hardship for Southland. An event etched deeply into our collective memories. For some, it is lived experience. For others, it is history told through stories, photographs, yellowed newspaper articles that captured both devastation and resolve. Those floods tore through farms and city streets alike. Paddocks vanished underwater, thousands of livestock lost, houses and homes were destroyed. Businesses were brought to a standstill. Our airport stood eerily quiet underwater. Yet, when we look back, what stands out just as clearly as the damage is how our community responded. Canoes were rowed through neighbourhoods, not for novelty, but necessity. Tractors rolled down D Street because they could help where nothing else could. There was no debate about responsibility. People simply showed up. Neighbours helped neighbours. Town and country stood together. That spirit, practical, courageous and generous, is something Southland carries quietly but deeply. As we reflect on those floods today, it is important not to think of more recent tragedies across our country without this in mind. The devastating events at Mount Maunganui, the landslips, the flooding through the East Coast and Northland, our own windstorm here last October. The weather events that have and will reshape our communities we will feel again and again. Different places, different decades, the same heartbreak. And alongside that heartbreak, the same courage. We saw ordinary people step forward in extraordinary ways, just as they did 42 years ago here in Southland. Community members who acted without hesitation, who put themselves at risk to help others. Your act of clarity, courage and bravery mattered. In moments like that, decisions made in seconds matter for a lifetime. You are heroes. Thank you to our first responders, those on the front lines in the most dangerous, chaotic moments. We sincerely do thank you. Your professionalism, your sacrifice and your commitment saves lives and holds communities together when everything else is falling apart. As we reflect on these tragedies, past and current, there is no simple lesson, but there is a clear truth. When disaster strikes, community matters, leadership matters, preparedness matters, and compassion matters. Let us honour those who we have lost by remembering not only the devastation, but the humanity that arose alongside it. Let us carry forward the lessons of the past and current with humility, resolve, care and kindness for one another. May we lead in a way that recognises both the fragility and the strength of communities that we serve. Kia kaha, kia kaha, kia kaha, New Zealand. Thank you.
Councillor Bond, beautiful words, thank you. We normally at this point have public forum, but in fact there is no one here for public forum, so we move on. We do have one late item for inclusion in the public excluded part of the meeting. That is questions and responses from Great South Statement of Intent. It will be heard in public excluded because it does contain information which is commercially sensitive. But would someone move that we do hear that today? Thank you. Councillor Ludlow and seconded Councillor Stewart. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Next we have the minutes of the Risk and Assurance Committee meeting held on the 15th of December 2025 to be received. Will someone who was there move that, please? Thank you. Councillor Tom McNaughton, seconded by Councillor Broad. Is there any discussion of those? If not, all those in... Oh, sorry. Yes, Councillor Deputy.
I sent an apology through to governance and the chair of that meeting on the Friday, saying I couldn't be there on the Monday, so just would...
Any other comments? Okay, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Next we have the minutes of the Extraordinary Finance and Policy Committee meeting held on Monday the 15th of December. Will someone who is at that meeting please move those? Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Councillor De Vries. Thank you. Is there any discussion of those? If not, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Next we have the minutes of the meeting of Council held on Tuesday the 16th of December 2025. Will someone move these, please? Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Seconded by Councillor Ludlow. Is there any other discussion? If not, then all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Takes us through to item 9 on the agenda, which is disposal of land for pump station purposes. Something of a historical document, this one, I think, wasn't it? But Heather, are you here to... Oh, yeah, you're there already. Do you want to speak to this?
Thank you, Mayor Campbell. I'll take the report as read. As you're aware, this was an oversight that from the meeting back in March of 2022. It's just a minor matter. So if there are any questions, please.
So this is for the piece of land where the new pump station was built, wasn't it, over the last 3 years?
That is correct, yes.
It is. Okay.
And the length of time was in getting the Minister of Conservation's consent.
Are there any discussion on that item?
Happy to move the two recommendations.
The seconder. Thank you. Is there any further discussion? And if not, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Heather. So next we have the submissions on the proposed local government regulatory reform. And I just want to say in this one actually in starting that there was, you know, the word tsunami's been used, you know, but there was a tsunami of proposals from government came out just before Christmas with a very short time period for us to develop submissions. That meant that staff had to work, mainly brain work, but had to work over the holidays thinking about how we should respond. And we have these proposed submissions today. So thank you to staff for thank you to staff for doing that work. And Rhiannon, you're going to speak to it.
I probably won't say much more, Mayor Campbell, than is in the report. Obviously, they are due fairly shortly, both of these submissions, so they have been prepared for your consideration, and happy to take feedback and questions.
Yes, so do you want to move to questions? Or do you don't have any other comments? You want to just move to questions?
Not unless you would like a summary of them.
Would anybody like a summary, or are you happy to just move straight through the questions? I think we can move to questions. Okay, so let's deal with them one at a time. So the first one is on the simplifying local government proposal. Are there questions on that, please? Yes, Councillor Crackett.
Thank you, Mick Campbell. In the submission, there's 2 lines in there around requesting that if we can achieve with mayors and chairs unanimously on a new structure, that it would be a request that it be allowed to proceed immediately, and then again it reiterates our preference to move at a faster pace if a unanimously chosen preferred pathway for the region can be found. Can you talk a little bit about what point, I guess, in the Local Government Commission process you would expect it to move from? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that if we agreed unanimously on a pathway, does that mean that we're asking for it to jump forward to the point of public poll? Or at what point in the timeline of that, what we have with the Local Government Commission at the moment, would it jump to, or we are requesting for it to jump to?
Well, one thing, I certainly think that the public, in being asked the question, in fact, not only that, but we, in forming the judgment, really needs to see data about the about the impact on the community, and that will be different for each of the councils because, you know, clearly we're in a different situation. So I would, for me, the earliest point where that could occur would be at the point where we had sufficient data to form that judgment. But as you say, then it would, if it were approved that we could move faster, it would still require to go to public referendum. Michael, do you want to comment?
Yes, thank you. Through yourself, Your Worship. The timeline, as it's indicated by the Local Government Commission, has an indicative date of around August 2027 penciled in relation to going to the public in relation to a poll. That is, if it gets through to that process, there's a number of steps to get through there from the Local Government Commission. what this is suggesting is that if there is a amicable solution arranged with the councils, then that would be able to be either put through a poll at that time or even faster. That is not currently a legislative component. Obviously, the Commission is an independent reviewing and then puts out its proposal through its working process through to the public as part of that process. So this is indicating a slightly different path than the legislation would indicate.
Yes.
I guess I can't really see how unanimously we could achieve agreement. I think it's especially, well, firstly, we don't have the data in front of us to make any kind of decision like that, but I also can't see a couple of our other parties likely agreeing to some of the proposal options on the table, especially without that data. So I would just caution us and wonder whether or not that is required to be or necessary to be in this submission.
I think, though, if the three councils and the regional authority were in furious agreement about a pathway, and if we did have the data which showed that that was beneficial to the province and beneficial to each year's, and let's suppose that we were a year into this process rather than 2 years into the process, then it would seem sensible at that point to accelerate it by going faster. But to do that would require each of the councils, not each of the mayors, each of the councils to approve that we went to the next step. So I think the control on that, Councillor Crackett, is really that council at that, if they felt that we were being premature, could simply stop it in its tracks. It would never get to that stage. But if we do get to the point where it's plain and obvious where we need to go and everybody's in agreement, then you would not want to wait another year or something to try to make that happen. Bear in mind that in the meantime we've got this parallel process which government's running, which would have, a situation where a board of the mayors would be trying to run the regional authority, which is, in my view, I think in many people's views, a pretty tough call. So if we can short-circuit that, then I think that we would. But I think the control, picking up your point, I think the control on that is it's going to be approved by each of the councils. So it would not get to that point unless unless collectively we did approve it.
So thank you for that explanation. It just seems like a wee bit of a long shot at this point, but on that basis, and thank you for your explanation, I'm happy with it going forward. I just...
Hope springs eternal in the
Yes.
mayoral breast.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, so we'll deal with these one at a time then, in that case. So we are asked to agree the submission on the simplifying local government proposal, noting any required changes. There are none at this point. So will someone move that we agree to the submission as it sits at the moment? Thank you, Councillor Ludlow. It's seconded by Councillor Demedy. Is there any other discussion? If not, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. The second paper is the submission on the rates capping proposal. So, Rhiannon, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the rates capping proposal obviously is quite technical in nature. It also has perhaps some gaps in the detail of the information which make it quite difficult to know exactly what is implied and intended by certain parts of the formula, for example, on how rates capping might work. Hence, the submission has quite a few, the proposed draft submission has quite a few caveats and questions within it itself, prompting requests for government to consider those matters and provide further advice. So I think this is the nature of where this process is sitting timing-wise, and has been discussed quite broadly across the sector. The structure of the submission goes in line with the questions that has been asked by central government. There are quite a few detailed points some of which are very specific to our council, some of which are broader across the whole sector. We've tried to include specific examples where relevant in order to provide some detail of scenarios where the impact of the proposed changes might be further considered. I think I might just pass to the Chief Executive if there's anything more specific he would like to say, given the technical financial nature of this matter.
Thank you, through yourself, Your Worship. The technical side of the equation leads towards a rates cap that is a target and its minimum, not based on any long-run forecasts, etc. It is based on a target. However, when you start looking at the maximum as it currently stands, it's very nationally set, not locally set or regionally set. And the other thing that is probably of important to note, if based on the model that we've been asked to review, if you look at it from a high growth city or region, if it was to be a regional assessment in relation to a high growth entity, they are automatically set to the minimum, because their maximum would actually be lower than the minimum based on the formula that is presented. It was very difficult to actually analyse this initially, but once we got the information from the DIA, it was a little bit easier to be able to work through. Just coming back to that minimum and stating that as a target, it is based on the Reserve Bank of New Zealand's target. I would note, and I'm happy to be on record because it is noted, that target has not actually been met ever. And that makes it problematic, but having said that, that is what it is based on in the model of the 2%. The capital side that was included in the model, and we've noted it as our understanding, it's not part of the upper and lower caps. It is more around indication that there is issues in relation to the capital programs, particularly around the funding in relation to depreciation and the ability to deliver on the renewals. We believe that's what it's trying to actually display. It's not really clear, so we're seeking a little bit of clarification in relation to the capital side, but as noted, it's not actually part of their upper and lower caps that they're indicating.
So when when this was announced by government in December, I think probably we thought, well, in fact, what it said in the can, what it said in the tin, was that there was a rates cap proposed between minimum 2 and maximum 4%. Actually, when you opened the tin, you found it was far more complicated than that. It was algorithm-based, and a very, very complicated algorithm where, in fact, it's actually pretty much impossible to work out exactly what it means because, well, you've got the names of the things that feed into the algorithm. You don't know whether they're percentages or, whole numbers or whether they're divided by, added to, or what. It's very, very complicated. So very difficult, therefore, actually to comment on at all. I think what we have done in this submission, we've neither spoken in favour nor against the concept of rates capping. We are not saying that we are against it at all. What we're saying is that we don't really quite understand it because there's not enough information to really guide us. If we were setting rates tomorrow using this formula, I don't think we'd be able to work through it because there's just not enough information provided in how it's supposed to work. So fundamentally, it's a submission which asks for more detail about how the formula would be applied and therefore how the minimum and maximum would be calculated in any given circumstance. and neither is it a range, the simple 2 to 4% that it said in the can, that would apply to everybody in New Zealand. In fact, every council would be different, wouldn't it? Because the formula would apply differently in each area depending on the local circumstances. And again, we're not necessarily against that concept. It's more a matter of understanding, how that algorithm would work. So it begs, what we know at this point begs more questions than it provides answers. But anyway, with that, taking the submission as it sits at the moment, Are there any questions from councillors? Councillor Crackett.
Thank you again, Your Worship. I've got a couple of comments just in relation to, I wondered if we could put in a point in particular around when government changes legislation and introduces new responsibilities for councils. It's not really clear on whether or not those new responsibilities would be considered core services or out. So I guess my suggestion would be that we include a comment that when government delegates new responsibilities to councils, that they be considered core services, because we have to do them. And so if that would be good to include if everyone would be agreeable. My second point...
Well, let's, you see two, so let's take, Michael, do you see any issues with that proposal?
Through yourself, Worship, no, I don't see an issue with adding a clause associated to that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Crackett, you had another one.
Thank you. My second thoughts were around, and you quite rightly have pointed out in the submission here, around the funding of Great South as our economic development agency and entities like Stadium Southland, that should we not be able to fund them, I would request that government can give us a bit of clarity on where the expectation of where the funding shortfall would come from. Is that something that government is looking to pick up? I guess, if we can't fund these services that we're providing for our community at the moment, we've got a whole lot of establishments that will go backwards, and I guess we all know that the government is kind of crying out for economic diversification and development and for us to increase our GDP. So if we no longer have a regional economic development agency, how are we expected to still do that?
It may be worth actually, just before we, as you say, how is it supposed to happen? But I think it's worth actually just explaining, either Rhiannon or Michael, because I never totally understood it. What would be the impediment, say, to financing Stadium Southland under this arrangement? It's already rated for. So how does this change result in it being impossible to fund?
Through yourself, Your Worship, I'm happy to take that. The challenge you've got in relation to those types of activities, and I'll also give the example of an art gallery as well. Those are activities that under the Local Government Systems Improvement Bill, which indicates what the core activities in relation to council are, the proposed core there does not include those particular services, so they would not be deemed to be able to be part of your rates cap and figures going forward. It would need to be a council decision in relation to whether you continue to provide those services. Having said that, that means that when you are doing trade-offs with your core services, you would need to trade off those particular activities as being ones that you would be trying to cap harder in relation to the others. You would focus on your core as opposed to the others. This particular piece of information has been highlighted by the ministry bodies that look after all of those areas as well, as being one area that councils will look at into the future. Not just reflecting on this council, I'm reflecting on national-wide. They are areas that the councils will look at and potentially push back towards central government in relation to the funding gaps.
So your proposal, Councillor Crackett, is that we are a little bit more explicit in the question that we ask government about, if not us, then who? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, and just, I guess, the impact on or potential unintended consequence on a variety of sectors. That, like, for example, your Sports New Zealand, I would say, is probably not exactly prepared to foot the bill or the shortfall for Stadium Southland. Or, there will still be a lot of strain on community providers as well. Creative New Zealand probably isn't going to fund our lovely brand new museum either going forward. There will be an unintended consequence of a lot more entities trying to go to government entities to be able to fund the shortfalls, when, that naturally it should sit with councils because they are our buildings and our entities.
So
in my mind.
you're really just proposing then that we strengthen what we've said, because we have said that, we've implied that. You want it just be a little bit more explicit in terms of saying, you know, again, if not us, then who?
Yeah.
Right, who's
Yeah.
going to fund it? Yeah.
Who, and typically that it would actually be central government that people will look to. So the unintended consequence is that they'll have more people coming to them rather than allowing councils to be empowered to fund it themselves.
Look, you would think, I would think that no government is going to allow, you know, pretty much every recreation centre in the country to close down because every council's got this issue, you know, and all the other stuff. So, I mean, it will be worked through. So I don't want to scare anybody to death who's watching this, that suddenly, you know, but the question is, how does it get worked through? Because it's, at the moment, if you look at the way it's written at the moment, then that would be the consequence. And I'm sure that will not end up being the consequence. But, you know, the point of the submission is to make sure that people are actually thinking about it and working through how it will work. Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions? Oh, Grant. Councillor Demery.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Campbell. Look, I think in the government's attempt to take a scalpel to sort of local government costs, they've actually taken a rusty pocket knife. And I don't have any confidence that in the, you know, trying to work with the methodology they've proposed, you know, by responding back adds to the process at all. I think what we need to do is, you know, apply a KISS principle. The intent and trajectory of what they're trying to achieve is to minimise the cost to ratepayers, right? So going back to the point you made at the outset, why don't we just simply propose that they set it at a range, you know, of between X and Y, and that's what councils have got to strive to achieve, as opposed to trying to come up with a methodology or trying to argue that, well, you should fund stadiums or you should fund this or that, because I think actually that adds to their argument around, well, we've asked you to try and cut your cloth and you're now saying you can't, so we'll do it for you. So I think we've got to come back and just say simply, look, we would see that we accept that you're trying to keep the costs down, and what we see is that we think you should come out with a proposal. We have to put to you that says our range of rates is going to be between X and Y, and that's where we're aiming for, and that's what you should expect to see from us annually. We maintain control of how we achieve that, whether we're funding this or we're funding that. We're still intent of what they're trying to achieve, but without trying to get too technical and up in just a methodology that's just so scientifically driven that it's impossible to achieve, and there's a whole lot of wasted time in it. So my thing would keep it short and right back and say, look, we'll aim to keep our rates between X and Y, which might be 3 and 5%.
I think it's appropriate though that, considering the amount of analysis which council has done on it, council staff have done, to identify, you know, where the proposed algorithm is, you know, inadequate or poorly thought through or incomplete. I think it's appropriate, you know, to reflect that in an answer. I mean, it's, you know, respecting the work that staff have done. But your point, which is to say that in our submission that we would prefer a much simpler model, really.
Propose back. They're looking, you know, and I think we're going to get a much better reception if we propose something back that's much more simplistic than try and argue around, well, you should fund this and you should fund that, because it's going to add to the weight that they're saying you can't cut your cloth, and that's what they're looking for us to say to them.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. Through yourself, Your Worship. What I would highlight is the consultation process that we've been allowed to participate in is very targeted in relation to the questions. We're only able to answer certain questions associated to it. We have made some general comments and tried to indicate that we're principally supportive in relation to inflationary components. Obviously, we've indicated that we're not necessarily in agreement with the inflation components used, which would change that percentage that you're talking about, Councillor. But the questions are targeted purely around their model. It was their model that they were asking for us to be, asking us to have a consultation on. They didn't really allow for any broader questions. most councils have taken an opportunity to throw the odd components in, which we have done as well, and indicating it. All we, with the non-core funding, is we were just indicating that there is an implication in relation to the proposed model that's a negative of consequences, and maybe to reflect more on the economic factors which would allow us to keep some of those components back into the overall council budgets, and we would still focus on trying to be efficient and effective as a council regardless of that component. So probably covers it as much as we can in relation to that, Councillor.
Keep it complicated.
Well, I think, as the Chief Executive has said, we are actually asked to answer specific questions.
Yeah, we are, yeah, but
Your suggestion, which is you don't answer those questions, you just go back and say, no, we'd rather have a simple range. I don't know if that... I think the work that staff has done to identify where the soft spots are in the algorithm, I think we should feed those back, because it's, you know, there's a lot of work that's going into it. Whether as part of that submission we should say, because I don't think it says anywhere else, we should say that we would prefer and support a much simpler formula, or a much simpler methodology, because it's clear that it's going to be hellish complicated actually to calculate the thing. Maybe we could add that single comment. But anyway, any other questions? So look, we're asked to approve this submission going forward. There have been 3 suggestions, the last one being that one, that we include a sentence that suggests that we would prefer a much simpler methodology and, to apply. Alex, just remind us what your 2 were.
The strengthening around the unintended consequence should we be in a bind not to be able to fund, have a funding shortfall for some of our key facilities that we currently provide, and the likelihood that it will be central government that will be looked to pick that up, and that any new responsibilities that get legislated by government, or any responsibilities that get handed off to us as a result of legislation changes, be considered core service and be looped into the...
So does anybody object to those 3 being added to the submission in some form? I mean, I don't think we're going to wordsmith them exactly here, but Michael has picked up the the sense of the 3. Does anybody object to those being added? Are there any other? Ria, you are on the brink of...
I'm supporting what my fellow councillors are saying, and in Councillor Crackett's explanation as to the unintended consequences, I think that bit really needs to be sharp and focused on exactly what they would be for our city. And it could very well be that our current business assets that we have now will be severely affected by the rates capping and the methodology that they've got, because it doesn't, one size does not fit all. We know that, despite what the government thinks. And it would be a sad day. Well, it already is actually. We get very little back from the government now. So, as to Alex's comment, will they increase what they give back to us in the offset?
Well, at the very least, we need to flush out whether they are unintended consequences or whether they are intended consequences.
Depends on which way you lie on the bed.
So, yes.
Sorry, can I just make a
Councillor
comment?
DeVries.
I just want to understand how we are reinforcing how, and I understand it's really hard to change what we answer in these directed questions, but how we reinforce that having locally led decision making is a priority. As a council, I think we should want to be able to respond to the demands of the ratepayers and what they are wanting us to direct, our funding of special projects into. But this proposal as it is doesn't seem like we're going to have the flexibility to do that unless we have special sign-off. I'm not sure how well reinforced that is within this letter. That's the only thing. And it might not be a space for it because of the questions.
I think it's a separate general point that's a little bit similar to Councillor Dermody's, in that it's a bit more all-embracing rather than the, sticking to discussing the algorithm. But I mean, I think it is a good point, because I think that we would support that, wouldn't we? That we would much prefer to be able to set our rates on the basis of local conditions and local decision making, rather than plug into an algorithm.
Yeah.
Now, Michael, is that something, that a sentiment that could be added to the?
Through yourself, Your Worship, we do talk about if they're using growth formulas in there, and I hate to get into the detail, but that's the way they've gone. If they're using those as targets and measures to actually make them regional or local, because that gives you that flex. If you've got different local circumstances associated to your region, then that can be taken into account. But it doesn't change the service mix locally. That only changes the ability to manage the growth and the economic aspects associated to it. If you've got higher growth, then you can work with that in relation to your model and your rates cap, so it would have a different range. That's what we've suggested, that they have a closer look at in relation to the model.
I think, though, the point that actually all three councillors have made maybe is that the response, and I think absolutely we got to respond with answering the questions, but that it's quite a technical response, and that maybe we should add some, fairly simple words about the, local decision making, simpler model, avoiding unintended consequences, and those four things. I mean, I think, capturing that broader comment, and actually in a single paragraph you could do it. I think that would be worth doing, because the response at the moment, although I support absolutely, saying everything that's in there, it is quite technical when you read it. It'd be good to have either a first paragraph or a last paragraph that summarised those other points that councillors wish to make.
Through yourself, Your Worship, based on that, you may want to have a recommendation 4, which, given the changes to that the rates capping proposal, that it is approved by the Mayor and CE prior to submission. Just because that sounds like we've got to do 3 or 4 more paragraphs, and time doesn't permit us to come back to council in relation to that timing. So just maybe if we add in a 4 in relation to the recommendations to allow us to get the approvals before submitting.
Be comfortable with taking that approach. So that one is being drafted at the moment as we speak, I guess. So while we're doing that, are there any other points for discussion coming out of it? Okay, so we have I think, yeah, based on the number 3, maybe, based on the discussion of council or something like that, it's just a little bit. Okay, so I think we already approved number 2, didn't we? Yes. Yeah, we did. So we're talking about number 3. Will someone move number 3 as it's written at the moment? Thank you, Councillor Dermody. Seconded, Councillor Crackett. Is there any other discussion? All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Through yourself, Worship, can we also get a mover and seconder for item 1, please? Just to receive the...
So Thank you, Councillor Demery. Seconded, Councillor Crackett. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you. So then we have the delegation for final approval of submission on the proposed local government regulatory reform planning bills. And presenting that, we have Shannon Baxter. Welcome back, Shannon. So I think this is your first time at council, isn't it, since you went away for a while?
Yes, that's right, Your Worship.
Yeah, and Jonathan, so who's going to speak to this?
I believe I'm going to, Your Worship.
Okay.
Kia ora koutou. As you all know, the central government has proposed to replace the RMA with two new bills. So it's the Planning Bill and the Natural Environment Bill. This report summarizes some of the key topics that Council plans to submit on, and it also, due to time constraints, requests delegation for final approval of Council's draft submission. We want to take the opportunity to emphasize the importance of submitting on these bills because they're going to have major implications on Council's roles, responsibilities, and budget, both in the short term and the long term. You'll see on the screens that the lovely Louise Taylor from Taylor Planning has joined us remotely as they have been helping us with policy work. She's now going to take you through some slides to give an overview of the bills, and then she'll touch on the key topics that we plan to submit on. Take it away, Louise.
Thank you. The floor is yours, Louise.
Kia ora, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Shannon. Kia ora koutou, councillors. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today. I've just shared my screen showing some slides. Is that popped up on your...
No, it hasn't.
Okay.
But worse come to worse, we can have them loaded because the governance team has them ready, Louise.
Okay. Well, they're certainly sharing at my end, so we might need to go to that alternate. Has that popped up now?
Got
No.
something? Is that the right one?
Governance has them up, so as long as you just let us know when to move the
amazing.
slides, we can go by that.
We can juggle. Thank you, Jane. Sure. So if we pop into the next slide, in terms of the purpose today, wanted to take this opportunity just to give you an overview of the implications of the Planning Bill and the Natural Environment Bill on Council. Those are the two bills that will become acts and will replace the Resource Management Act. So significant change, as Shannon alluded to. And the other part of today, I just wanted to summarise the key submission topics that we're recommending. So next slide, please. The RM reform, you have seen this slide before. You've seen a couple of these in your December briefing, but I understand you had a lot of content that day and it was moved through fairly quickly. I won't spend a lot of time, but I'm obviously really happy to answer any questions as they come up if you would like. But just in a really high-level summary, there will be two acts that will replace the Resource Management Act. So there's the Planning Act, which deals with most of the things that you as a district or city council will be responsible for. And then there's the Natural Environment Act, which will be largely a regional council function at the moment. And as you know, central government are looking at options to sort of merge the two. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses in the coming years. So there's a number of new documents that will be produced at that national level. Those national policy directions, they will be much more directive than the current version that we see under the RMA. Then there'll be the regional spatial plan, which will be prepared under the Planning Act. And then there'll be a national E-plan, which you will be responsible for your district, essentially what the equivalent of what is now your district plan. And that'll form a chapter into that national sort of E-plan. So if we just move to the next slide. I can't actually see what's up, so I'm just guessing we're on the right slides here. So under the Planning Bill, I thought I'd just reiterate. So under there's the regional spatial plan. You'll be responsible to work with Environment Southland and SDC and Gore District Council together to produce a regional spatial plan. As the only city in that group, it's really important that you get thoroughly involved in that process and that and your staff get involved in terms of of providing really good information so you end up with a product you're really, really happy with. And then, as I mentioned, there'll be the natural environment plan that'll be prepared by the region, and the land use plan, which will be all of the districts and your city will contribute to chapters to that plan that will all come together as one plan. It'll be an e-plan, so it'll be much more accessible to people nationally. Next slide, Natural Environment Bill. I don't think I'll talk about this in detail. You will have seen this already, but this is largely the region's responsibility. But something that's important to remember is that it enables use and development of natural resources within environmental limits. So that is new, and it'll be very interesting to see how central government provide guidance on those limits and what level of input the region and the city councils have to determine what are the appropriate limits for your area. So it's focuses on air, water, soil and ecosystems, protects human health from harm caused by discharges of contaminants, and achieves a no net loss in Indigenous biodiversity. One thing that's really pushed forward in this new legislation relates to natural hazards, and it requires a risk-based planning approach. Māori interests are provided through the development of those national instruments and also the other spatial plans and natural environment plans. And there'll be still the identification of sites of significance to Māori, which is required, similar to the RMA. And next slide, hopefully it says how the new system differs from the RMA. And in fact, this is really what's important, I guess, to feed into your submission. So making sure you're comfortable with the approach and how it is different to the current system. So what the terming it a funnel approach, which is really about top-down, high national level direction, but still local level decision making in terms of the detail of plans and resource consent processes. There's no sort of sustainable management thing anymore, no future generations requirement that we have in the RMA. There's a list of goals that are set out in each of the two pieces of legislation. There's no reference now to Te Tiriti of Waitangi. It talks more now about Māori interests. And importantly for you, there'll be now 17 those of combined regional plans across the country, which will replace all of the more than 100 district and regional plans and policy statements that we have at the moment. Regulatory relief is being proposed, and that's something that I'll return to. It is something that we're recommending you submit on. So that essentially it's a mechanism that councils will be required to provide when new rules are likely to significantly impact a landowner's reasonable use of their land. And that could be if it's a landscape overlay or a biodiversity overlay or sites of significance to Māori. So that relief might include cash payments, rates rebates, extra development rights, no fee consents, or the provision of expert advice. There will be national standardisation, and this is something that's important to appreciate. So at the moment, when you develop your district plan, like when we're just currently doing a plan change to your district plan around housing, you were able to have flexibility of what sort of provisions that you put into that plan to make it bespoke to Invercargill. That won't be the case anymore, so it'll be very standardised. There'll be set zones that the central government will prepare. There'll be set rules, and your team really will be choosing which zone applies where. So much more limited scope for flexibility. Reduced consultation requirements. So there will be, the bar is raised for notification. There'll be limited circumstances for public notification, but the intention is there would be less publicly notified resource consent applications. There's a narrower spectrum of regulated effects, so that's effects of activities that can be considered by a decision maker, and that's at a plan level and also at a resource consent level. So no longer will you be able to consider things like visual amenity, character, landscape, and those sorts of things, urban design. And there's an establishment of a planning tribunal for the small scale disputes. So this slide, the next slide, just shows you visually kind of what I've just talked about. So on the left, there's the sort of triangle shape, which is the way the government's describing the current RMA system. On the right-hand side is the new system. So what they're terming the funnel, or the upside down triangle. So yeah, planning bill, natural environment at the top there. Central government will provide committing to provide a strong level of national direction. So that'll be policy statements and plans, and also standard templates that will need to be applied for things like your spatial plan, for your district plan, and so on. And then, as I talked about, at that regional and local government level, you'll be preparing a combined plan for the region, which is a spatial plan. And then there's the natural environment and land use plan. So you'll have the responsibility of your land use plan, which will form a chapter to that plan. In terms of approvals, there'll still be resource consents under the planning bill, but under the natural environment bill, they'll be called permits. So a little bit unsure on why there's that difference in wording. And what it does mean that if you are a developer looking to develop something that requires, say, a discharge permit as well as a land use component, you will actually have to apply for consents or approvals under two pieces of legislation. So I'll come back to that is something that we're suggesting that you submit on. The next slide is goals of each bill. I won't go through this in detail, but just that gives you a flavour of the things that the intention, this is actually in the legislation itself. So instead of the purpose and principles that we have under the RMA, the goals of the planning bill and goals of the natural environment bill are listed in the acts, or will be listed in the acts. Excuse me, and they set out the things that government is intending to achieve. So I don't think I need to go through that in detail. And then just really a summary in terms of the implications for council. I just think at the moment it's important to think about. So firstly, you will be required to work with AES, SDC and Gore District to prepare a regional spatial plan. So important that you're thinking about that and budgeting for that, and making sure you're prepared to put resources into that. You'll be required to prepare a district chapter of a new land use plan. So that's like your current district plan, but it'll be much more directed by national templates. You still will be required to process resource consents and issue those, but there will be a new process set out, and there'll be different notification triggers. So that obviously will require changing in your internal systems and staff training and all of those sorts of things. There'll be impact on council projects and assets in terms of forward planning. So this is why I say this will impact your whole council. It's not just a planning issue. It'll impact those who are responsible for, your parks and reserves, your three waters, all of your assets. And how they are firstly provided for really well in your spatial plan. That will be really important, and whether you want to designate some of those. And the second part is how they are consented. So if you're doing projects down the track, whether the acts are providing well for those. As I mentioned, there's appeals process will be to the planning tribunal or the environment court. So it's unclear at this stage what obligations there would be on council to participate in those processes, but I think you would need to assume that you would need to participate if you did get any appeals to either of those two bodies. So that's a bit of a very quick 101 on the planning bill and the natural environment bill. Are you happy for me to just move straight through to the key submission points? So this is really picking up on the report that you've got in your agenda now.
Yep, I think you should just carry on. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So I've been working with Shannon and Jonathan, and also talking with other councils and other organisations. Obviously, there's a keen interest around the industry on this stuff, and I think there's 4 topics that sort of we're thinking that would be worth submitting on. In addition to, at the start of the paper, you'll see we listed a number of bullet points where we think it's worth submitting in support. So largely, I think council's submission would be in support of the new legislation. Of course, the goals of more, less onerous obligations, more efficiency, less consenting, I think is something that everyone is really supportive of, and I anticipate you will be as well. So those are the sort of things that we recommend you support. In terms of the regional spatial plan, so if you click to the next slide, there's a timeline there which shows the transition to the new RM system. Hopefully that's up at the moment. One of the things that I think is worth being aware of is that you are required to prepare a spatial plan, and actually what most councils have done in the past is prepare them often in steps. So you might have done it in urban areas, township areas over time, and that gives your team, you have enough resourcing to manage that process, so you can consult with your community and make sure that the community is having input as needed. That won't be possible under this system. So you will be required to notify a regional spatial plan. So that's combined with Environment Southland District Council and Gore District Council 15 months after there's the royal assent of the bill. So once they become law, which we're anticipating will be probably May, June this year, you will have 15 months to prepare your whole spatial plan for the whole region and get that notified. So that's an ambitious timeframe, particularly given you'll want to consult with your community about that during that period. And it also will require quite a lot of internal work around servicing and how you planning in terms of future land use pattern changes and things. So it's quite a significant task, and certainly the recommendation is that you submit to just raise a flag with central government about that time frame, and then who's going to pay. Obviously there's quite a significant investment in these processes, and which will require both internal and external advice. So it's about, who's going to fund that. So that's the sort of suggestion around the first topic, which is the spatial plans. The other point in terms of the submission is we recommend that you seek clarification regarding how the environmental limits will be applied at that spatial plan level. So if you think about a spatial plan, it's kind of saying these are the areas we want certain activities to be established both now and into the future. And it's a really long-term look, so it's up to 30 years. And the Act actually requires that the environmental limits are taken into account when you're deciding, whether a certain area is good for development. Now, the way the Act is actually sort of set out the transition period is you would actually prepare the spatial plan first, and then the environmental limits would come later. So there's a question around, well, how can you use the environmental limits to make decisions about spatial planning when that work hasn't been done yet? So that's a submission point that's being recommended there. Next slide. So the next point that we wanted to talk through is the effects that are now out of scope. So I mentioned earlier that the intention is to limit the types of activities or effects of an activity that are considered through a consenting process via the new planning system. And so this slide lists those effects that are effectively out of scope, won't be able to be considered either when you're developing any of your plans or during a resource consent process. And there's a couple there that our team and your team think are a little bit problematic. And I guess I'd use the example again with your Plan Change 2 that's open for submissions at the moment under the RMA. That's an effort by council to improve urban design of medium density housing. So it's really about encouraging medium density design housing and making sure when people build multi-unit developments, they do that in a way that improves the amenity and character of the area. So under the new legislation, you won't be able to consider those matters. So you can't it says things like amenity effects, landscape effects, or anything that preserves character or visual amenity. So the only exceptions to that are if an area has been identified as an outstanding natural landscape. Now, that's not such an issue for Invercargill, obviously, but for other districts like Queenstown, that's pretty important. But it really does limit things like, those character, amenity kind of factors. You wouldn't be able to consider that if a developer said, hey, I want to build a, 10-unit development, and you just have to accept whatever design they came up with. So that's something that your team are keen to raise with central government, and point out that actually some of that stuff's really important to create livable, pleasant cities. The third topic, and next slide, relates to the regulatory relief. And I mentioned this earlier in the start of the presentation. And this slide, I think, is quite a nice little graphic, which just gives you a summary of how that's going to work. So when you're considering controls at that plan level for things like significant historic heritage, so that's a building that would be listed to be protected, Indigenous biodiversity, as I mentioned before, outstanding natural landscapes and features, and high natural character, and sites of significance to Māori. So when you're considering any of those matters, and you are required to consider those and impose controls over those under the legislation, so there's no choice about that, you do need to do that. But if you choose to put one of those overlays on or in the plan, you need to justify the application of the controls for each site. You need to consider the impact of those, and to proactively identify and set out regulatory relief mechanisms. And it's the regulatory relief part that's making quite a lot of councils nervous, because what it does is it basically means that you would be required to consider whether rates reductions, some sort of payout, or bonus development rights need to be provided to a landowner who is affected by these overlays. So that does feel a little bit, you can't kind of win. So you're required to protect these areas under the Act, but then you're also required to provide relief to landowners. And so that's a concern of all councils that I've talked to, puts you in a pretty impossible position.
Could you clarify a point there?
Yes.
So does that only apply if council has exercised some discretion with respect to what it allows, or does it apply even when the government, even when council are simply following the rules?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you are required under the Act to impose those overlays. So, if you've got a building within the city that has significant heritage values, you are required to protect that under what will be your land plan. So it will be a decision specifically that you make. So it's not like the central government will come down and say, you need to protect this building, this building, and this building. It'll be a task for you as a council, but it's a required task. And then at that stage, you would need to say, well, do we need to provide regulatory relief to the owner of that building? Does that answer your question, sir? Or?
Yep, thank you.
Yes.
So, what are the questions? Otto.
Is Louise finished?
Pardon?
Is Louise finished?
You finished, Louise?
One more.
Sorry, carry on.
No. One more slide or topic. The last topic relates to the consenting process, and as you will be aware, the intention is to make resource consenting simpler, more efficient. One of the issues that we have identified is that because there's these two pieces of legislation and you're going to have two types of consenting processes running through, they are slightly different in the way the wording of the Act is set out, and the notification triggers are different. So this slide shows that under the planning bill, you would publicly notify a resource consent application for a development where adverse effects are more than minor. But under the Natural Environment Bill, you would publicly notify an application where there are significant adverse effects. And I know that's a bit planny speak, but essentially there are two different tests. And so the concern with that the team has is around, well, how would you actually make that work in practice? Because you'd be working in with the region, and you'd have different tests for notification, so it's quite messy. So the recommendation is that the submission point essentially says, look, the preference is actually to have consenting under one piece of legislation, because it will be much more straightforward and more efficient. But if that isn't possible for whatever reason, there at least should be consistency in terms of how consents are processed under both pieces of legislation. Yes, that's me, thank you. So just next steps was really just confirming that council are comfortable with the recommendations in the paper, which is really just the submission points that I've set out, and that we have some delegation around final approval for the submissions. Thank you.
Yeah, so Shannon or Jonathan, did you want to add anything else before we go to questions?
No, happy to go to questions, Your Worship.
So first question from Councillor Ludlow.
Not a question, a comment. I'm supportive of the submission. I was particularly interested, obviously, around the portion dealing with spatial planning, and agree that the 15-month time frame is ambitious as polite Kiwi understatement. It's kind of asking for Rome to be built in half a day. And the fact that it also picks up on where do the costs lay, bearing in mind that in 15 months' time, rates capping applies. And we're also putting the chicken before the egg in that how we are supposed to account for environmental standards that we don't yet know. So they were of particular interest to me, and I'm glad that they're picked up in the submission. They were my primary concerns, but happy to move the three recommendations, Mayor Campbell.
Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Mayor Campbell. Shannon, if it's okay with you, for people that are at home watching this, if they are this afternoon and wondering what does all this gobbledygook mean, and simple questioning, with the explanation that Louisa gave us, and I know that this will come up later on in today's agenda, but just a simple question: does that mean that that this new legislation can oversee what can happen with a particular building in town if we decide that it's no longer fit for purpose? Do we actively as a council under the new legislation get to decide that? Obviously with feedback, consultation and considerations given.
No, it shouldn't change
Okay.
that if you have a specific building in mind.
Perfect. And then the second one, which is it's just picking up, it could be that people at home will be thinking something else can happen. This doesn't give developers the right to suddenly want to build housing in at Queen's Park.
No, well, that's a reserve space, so
Exactly.
reserve spaces are different.
Thank you.
But it does mean that we just will have less control over amenity if you want to build on a standard residential one or one site.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I'm going to be quite blunt about this question, and it concerns historic council having the control over its own historic look. That's what I take from this. So is that the end of the Historic Places Trust, for them interfering with the council's right to look after its own city? That was a question.
Shannon.
I'm happy to take that, Your Worship. Heritage New Zealand is a separate entity from the central government anyways, and so our district plan is what gives the power over heritage buildings in our district. So we take our cues from Heritage New Zealand, but it's each council's district plan that actually creates what is given to effect for heritage buildings.
Well,
Does that help, Ian?
No, it doesn't, because the way this is worded, the way I've listened to it, is quite clear that there is no place for Heritage New Zealand, because why, they could say what they want to, but why do we have to listen?
You don't have to listen right now. council gets to decide what this community values as their heritage. So for example, the Invercargill Heritage List is taken essentially directly from the Heritage New Zealand list, and that would have been done decades ago. But take Dunedin as...
We can change that at any time we want to.
Through a plan change, yeah. But Dunedin, on the other hand, when you look at their listed heritage buildings in their district plan, it's actually quite different than the Heritage New Zealand list. So you don't have to take their list verbatim. Whenever it was created in the past, and I'm unsure when that point would have been, that's what they chose to
Previous
do.
problems like the Bluff Oyster Festival, you know, the hotel. Would that happen again under this sort of control?
It would matter when we look at heritage in the future land use plan. So I really can't say at this point just because we don't start that process for a while, but it's something that would be raised with the elected members and you guys would have input on as well as the community would have input on.
Still, I don't see any clarity there at all.
The words Heritage New Zealand are not mentioned anywhere in the 700 pages of these bills. All that's mentioned for heritage is that it's no longer proposed, that it's no longer an effect that can be taken into consideration.
So if you look at the change to amenity values, people cannot complain about wind farm that's being put up on...
So, sorry, can you repeat that? Could not complain about what?
So they can't complain about a wind farm. They can't complain about their amenity values have been affected. Or say someone puts a salmon farm out in the middle of Phobos Strait. Could they complain about the amenity value, affecting their views?
Of looking out onto them.
Yeah. Could that happen?
The slide that Louise had up, it points out that views from private property are proposed to be excluded. So you're right,
So they don't. It doesn't matter if you can put something there and the private property doesn't have any right to object, or the other way around.
That's my understanding, Lou. Would you agree with that? Other things will come into play, obviously, but...
There's a couple, it's tricky, and I understand it's tricky at the moment because we're talking about legislation, it's high level and it's not example specific. But if you were talking about a wind farm that was being established on an area that wasn't an outstanding natural landscape, so it wasn't a protected landscape, then yes, my understanding is the way the legislation is drafted, council wouldn't be able to consider the impact, the visual impacts of that development on anyone looking at it from wherever they are.
Councillor Pottinger, are you?
No, that's fine. I think we'll just have to wait. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? No? Okay, well, we have 3 recommendations. The first, that Council receives the report. The second, that it agrees the key points for submission, noting any required changes. And I don't think we have actually said anything about changes from there. And thirdly, that we nominate a councillor or the Chief Executive to approve Council's final submission to central government on the proposed planning bills. My recommendation in terms of nominating a councillor would be that Councillor Ludlow should be that councillor. I don't think it's actually either or him or the Chief Executive, because the reality is I'm absolutely guarantee that the Chief Executive will also have a look at it before it actually goes through. So it's, although it says or, it's actually and. I'm happy to leave the or but I just know that the Chief Executive is going to look at it. So I would nominate Councillor Ludlow for that task, and I can see he's enthusiastically endorsed that nomination. It's not a small task. It's a huge task, actually, so thanks, Dan, for being prepared to be involved in it.
Given the lack of feedback for change, it is a small task.
Okay. Okay, so we'll take all 3 at once. Will someone move those? Thank you, Councillor Demery. Seconded Councillor Broad. Is there any other discussion? All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Yeah, popular acclamation. No? Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you, Louise.
Hmm?
Thanks, Louise.
Oh, thank you, Louise. Is that it finished? Thank you, Louise. Cheers. So next we have the amendment to the government's statement, which is in Michael Morris's name.
Thank you, Your Worship. Very quick report, just updating the delegations register and the governance statement, moving health and safety to full council, so that the entire council can have oversight of the health and safety of all employees at the Invercargill City Council, and making those changes so that it is so, and you'll see the first report coming through to this meeting later on public excluded.
Could you just comment, Michael, on the reason why the whole report remains in public excluded? I mean, I know that this has been discussed before, but I think when it has been discussed before, the point that councillors have tended to make is that, well, we put it in the public excluded because it can involve, naming people or, describing accidents where it's obvious who the person is. But those parts of the reports which are purely, data and statistics and so forth, is there any reason why that should not be done in public?
Thank you, Your Worship. There are a number of reasons under Lagoima that we can do this, but I'll pass that to Trudy Hurst, who has responsibility for this area, to answer.
Through you, Your Worship, there are some incidents which are in the report where it would be very easily to identify individuals concerned, so it is appropriate for it to be in public excluded at this time.
Yeah, that's actually what I said. That there will be circumstances where, because of the nature of it, or because there's only one person does the job, then that becomes apparent. But in terms of the data, if I look at the data that's provided, I just wonder why there's anything in there that should be kept from public.
It's from an efficiency perspective, but if we can look at having two reports, one in public excluded and one in public.
I mean, I do think the public, in my view, have got a right to know what the raw statistics are, how many injuries we have and so forth, and what the, the TRIFR is and so forth. Do other councillors have any comment on that? Yes, Councillor De Vries.
Well, I just would like to know if there was a mechanism to be able to release any of the data or statistics at a broad level that you're talking about after the meeting and maintain the privacy of those data that can be identifiable.
Through you, Your Worship, this is completed through the quarterly performance reporting, so any of the key performance indicators, and there is a health and safety key performance indicator that gets reported publicly every quarter. So we do that, but we can look at some options and bring that back.
I would appreciate that. So we are, at the moment, this report sits in infrastructure, doesn't it, or previous to today? But clearly it's a matter that concerns all council, and therefore it's a matter that should be heard by all council. But I think also it's a matter that concerns all public, and what's available to be, or what's suitable to be made public, I think it's better that it were. So I would appreciate if you could have a look at that question. Please. Governance statement.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. We just, if somebody is happy, we would probably be up to the stage of, I don't think there's any more questions, but if someone would move and second it, then.
Thank you, Councillor Crackett. Seconded, Councillor Dermody. Is there any other discussion? All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Through to the Chief Executive's management report.
Thank you, through yourself, Your Worship. There's two things that I'd just like to highlight, and one's already been highlighted already, which is the workload of the team over the end of year period in relation to working on what we were calling the tsunami of reforms. And some of those reforms we've chosen to submit on somewhere, obviously working with industry, submissions associated to them. but a big call out to my team in relation to the work that was done in relation to that space, and a big thank you. The other one, it's a brief. I've got the Sir Tim Shadbolt, but comments in there in relation to the passing, but I actually want to focus on a big thank you to my organisation and the support that they did around the service. There was quite a significant piece of work done by our team, and I thank them all in relation to that. And just to avoid any questions associated to that component, we are still working through the costing. I know we have been asked about that. We haven't yet finalised the costing associated to that, and we will be able to release that once we've got that all available. There are two other items within the report which I have got Jonathan here to answer in relation to any direct questions. But we've given insight in relation to a couple of key legislative changes. One around the Granny Flats building consent exemption that has come through in relation to change of legislation, and also the earthquake-prone buildings changes. So I'll leave those as council has read. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Questions to Michael? Yes, Councillor De Vries.
Sure. Thank you for the report. I'm just curious as to kind of what the mechanisms are of monitoring homeowners who have notified or have not notified their council that they're going to be building a flat. It seems like in the appendix provided around the guidance that they can or cannot do it. Like, there doesn't seem like there's a rule.
Thank you. Through yourself, Worship, I'll hand over to GM of regulatory side in relation to notification, who'll give the clarity how we get notified.
So, through you, Your Worship, this is probably illustrative of legislation that's been fast-moving. I wouldn't call it breakneck, but I'd probably say it's a gallop. The team have put all they need to in place in terms of the guidance. We haven't been deluged with applications, but it's fair to say we have had some inquiries, particularly as a result of the media. Some media articles suggesting that perhaps it's as simple as just building it. There is a process for people to step through. I'm very wary of what I say in public space, given it's so new. I was given a 15-point cheat sheet by one of the staff members today, which covers quite a lot. And then the MB guidance is at 75 pages. What I would say is that the onus is upon the building owner to thoroughly consult all the guidance. If in doubt, please come and talk to us. We are here to help. We will do our level best in terms of monitoring. It's early days. We are going to have to actually assess how many applications we're aware of and then make a call on what needs to be done past that point. Taking into account, I would anticipate an increase in the number of requests for service from concerned parties. So yes, we will almost certainly need to step up our compliance and enforcement activity in response, but we will take a measured approach and see how things go first.
Anybody?
Yeah, thanks, Campbell. Jonathan, how will these units be rated? Like, is there improved value that's attributed to the property with a unit on it, and then so it's increased, or?
So there are, as I understand it, rating implications, which I will defer to my colleague, Patricia.
Through you, Your Worship, there will be some implications in capital value, but a lot of these granny flats could well be considered a separately used and inhabitable portion, which do mean that they attract a separate UAGC. So some of our rates are based on separately used and inhabitable portions, and some are on capital value, so that does have a rating implication. So that's why the notification requirement is really important.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to talk a little bit, Jonathan, about, I guess, housing density, and that at the moment, if you're subdividing down to, I think, is it in the district plan, you may need to correct me here, but this is because this is just from memory. So you have 420 squares, you can build up to 140 metres squared home on that, and you still have to have a specific percentage of permeable surface within that section lot, so that you've got drainage, right? If then that person's got their resource consent to build said house, and they built their home in a way that would allow for a granny flat to also be built on that, and it has to get a PIM, but it doesn't have to get formal consent. And they can build up to 70 squares. That would then take up another 70 squares on said 400 square lot, and you've got barely any permeable surface there, right? So I guess my question is around how do we know what kind of impact this is going to have long term on our infrastructure with less permeable surface in the city? How do we know how much density or how many granny flats can be built in a particular area, and I guess what kind of impact that will have? I guess those are my first two questions. So we'll start with that.
So through you, Your Worship, I have to say I don't have any definite answers in this space. We will have to wait and see what the outcomes are. Whatever the law entitles you to do, it does not entitle you to be a nuisance, and therefore it would become a compliance and enforcement matter.
And I guess another unintended consequence of that is that you could potentially have a situation where if you don't have any, or very minimal permeable surface, you're creating an issue for your neighbours, and that it will run off into their areas. So what powers, or not powers, but rights do your neighbours have to complain about potential runoff that they may be impacted by?
Again, it then becomes a compliant enforcement matter, and we would need to assess it, determine what has taken place, what's causing it, and what the remedial action needs to be.
So I guess just to round that off, there is nothing to... That's absolutely a situation that could happen, and that the house already exists. They put a granny flat on it. The land is, down to 420 or 450 squares, and now it's actually about 70% taken up by housing.
So again, through the chair, yes, I'm trying to take a Zen approach on this. Good thing, bad thing. We will need to wait and see.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Another unintended consequence.
I know there are quite a lot of them at the moment.
It's a buzzword.
Mayor Campbell, it comes back to what Jonathan said at the beginning, though. That's why people are still encouraged to come and check with council first.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Not to scaremonger, just curious as to how this...
Questions, then we are asked to receive the Chief Executive's report. Will you move that, Councillor Dermody? Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Boyle. Is there any other discussion? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Okay, well that concludes the public part of the meeting. So thank you for everyone who has joined us on live stream today. But we are moving into public excluded, so we have to say farewell. Thank you.
Move that we do that.
Okay, yeah. Thank you,